Welcome, it's Sue with Get to the Farm. Today we're continuing our look at the big three of plant nutrients, potassium. Potassium is the third of the essential macronutrients that plants need to thrive, along with nitrogen and phosphorus. It plays a vital role in several processes, including regulating water balance, strengthening cell walls, and improving disease resistance. We'll explore different ways to supply potassium in your garden and discuss the benefits and drawbacks of each method. So whether you're a seasoned gardener or just starting, stick around to learn more about this critical nutrient and how to give your plants the potassium they need to flourish. Vegetable crops consume a large amount of potassium from the soil in a given year, while in other types of gardens, where plants are not harvested each growing season, only small amounts of potassium are removed from the soil. Most vegetable gardens require supplemental potassium to replace what has been taken up by the crops and to ensure a constant supply is available to the plants. The easiest way to maintain soil potassium levels is to apply green sand every 4 or 5 years. Other sources of potassium are discussed in this video, but it's important to avoid overuse and burning of synthetic forms of potassium. Organic sources have low risk of burning and supply potassium while increasing long-term reserves. Dry climate soils may be naturally well endowed with potassium, so it is important to ensure that potassium is actually needed there before adding any. Excess potassium can easily be leached from the soil, so it is important to avoid overuse of potassium fertilizers as they can escape into groundwaters. Animal manures and most plant residues are good low-level potassium sources. Newly transplanted trees, shrubs, perennials, and bulbs benefit from a fall dose of potassium, which increases their cold tolerance and improves their chances of surviving a harsh winter. When applying potassium, it's important to avoid sources that contain nitrogen, as that fall dose of nitrogen has just the opposite effect. The recommended application rate for vegetable gardens and shrubs can be adjusted depending on your soil fertility, with half as much needed for shrubs and trees in average soil. If soil tests show low potassium levels, applying the full recommended amount at the beginning of the growing season is recommended. Green sand, which is slower acting than the other sources, should be applied in the fall so the potassium will be available by the following spring. If green sand is applied in the spring, it should be supplemented with a fast-acting source, such as a foliar spray of liquid seaweed. In sandy or low organic matter soils, it's important to divide the recommended amount into 2 or 3 smaller amounts and apply them 2 or 3 times during the season to prevent luxury consumption and leaching. Natural organic sources of potassium include green sand and glauconite, while synthetic sources include potassium chloride or muriate of potash and potassium nitrate or saltpeter. It's important to use these sources carefully and avoid overuse. Here's a look at some of the sources of potassium. Natural sources of potassium for the garden include various organic and mineral materials that can be readily incorporated into the soil. Green sand, such as glauconite, is a natural organic source of potassium, which is rich in micronutrients and improves soil quality by loosening up structure and absorbing excess water in clay soils, and improving water and nutrient retention in sandy soils. It's best applied in the fall or to compost piles for building up long-term reserves rather than treating short-term deficiencies. Though moderately expensive, green sand can last in the soil approximately 5 to 10 years, so it's worth that extra expense. For average soil, the rate of application of 4 to 5 pounds per 100 square feet is recommended, while soils deficient in potassium require 8 to 10 pounds per 100 square feet. Wood ash, which is a byproduct of burning wood, is another source of potassium. Contains about 5 to 7% potassium, 20 to 30% calcium, 1 to 4% magnesium, and trace amounts of iron, depending on the variety of wood burned. It can supply micronutrients as well. It's a rich source of calcium, which raises soil pH about 2/3 as much as limestone. However, recommended rates should not be exceeded, and it should not be applied if the soil pH is over 6.5. It's also not good for acid-loving plants. The approximate duration of wood ash in the soil is about 2 years, and the rate of application of 1 pound per 400 square feet is recommended for average soils, while up to 3 pounds per 100 square feet is recommended for soils with potassium deficiency. Of course, manure and compost is always a good option. In average soils, it will supply most of the potassium requirements. If extra is needed, composting banana peels or seaweed can add a boost. Sulfur of potash magnesia, also known as langbonite, typically contains about 22% potassium, 11% magnesium, and 22% sulfur. Is a fast-acting source of potassium and magnesium that is good for short-term boosts. However, it should not be used with dolomite limestone, or else there will be too much magnesium. It also supplies sulfur and does not affect soil pH, making it good for salty soils. It's sold under the names of Sulpomag or K-Mag, and its approximate duration in the soil is 3 to 6 months. With a rate of application of 0.5 pound per 400 square feet recommended for average soils, and 1 pound per 400 square feet recommended for soils with potassium deficiency. Potassium chloride, or murate of potash, 0060, 50% potassium, 47% chlorine. It's inexpensive, but should not be used in chlorine-sensitive plants like potatoes, grapes, citrus, or tree crops, or where soil salt levels are high. The approximate duration of potassium chloride in the soil is 3 to 6 months, and a supply of 1/4 pound per 100 square feet in average soil, or 0.5 pound per 100 square feet in soils deficient in potassium, is recommended. Potassium nitrate, or saltpeter, 13044, with 37% potassium, is a fast-acting source of potassium and nitrogen. It is easily leached from the soil. It's not acidifying, but it should not be used where soil salt levels are already high. Its duration in the soil is 3 to 6 months. Label directions should be followed carefully to avoid over-fertilizing with the nitrogen component. Potassium sulfate, with a composition of 0050, 42% potassium, 18% sulfur, does not have an overall acidifying effect on the soil. It's suitable for chlorine-sensitive plants or soils with high levels of chlorine. It lasts for 3 to 6 months in soil. It should be applied at a rate of 1/4 pound per 100 square feet in average soil, and 0.5 pound per 100 square feet in potassium-deficient soils. Another option is potassium thiosulfate, which is reclaimed as a manufacturing byproduct and contains 0.025 and 17% sulfur. It's fast-acting and is used in both foliar and regular fertilizers. However, it tends to increase soil acidity. It lasts for 3 to 6 months in the soil. For average soils, supply of 0.5 pound per 100 square feet is recommended, while 1 pound per 100 square feet is recommended for soils deficient in potassium. So, potassium plays a critical role in the growth and development of plants, aiding in root development, disease resistance, and more. However, like any other nutrient, it's essential to use potassium fertilizer in moderation and follow the instructions on the label. By doing so, you'll ensure that your plants receive the right amount of potassium, leading to healthy, vigorous growth. Remember, a well-fed plant is a happy plant. Thanks for watching. Happy gardening. Remember to hit that subscribe button. We look forward to seeing you next time. And I feel like New York City. Get me to the farm.